so we needed to put something together there. That was kind of a backyard play.
I'm a loser.
At the last second on
We weren't bold at all. I'll be the bold one here. I say that Derrick Henry goes over 100 yards with a touchdown against the Raiders next week. I think the Ravens are against the Raiders next week. I think the Ravens are going to let out some frustration against a bottom of the league kind of team. I think they're just going to get out to an early lead, maybe with Lamar Jackson throwing the ball a little bit, get to a 14-point lead, and then they're just going to run Derrick Henry into the ground. I think they're really going to prove a point here that he's going to be a big part of this offense for the season.
You are listening to the Beltway Wars Invitational Podcast, hosted by Adam Jackson and Patrick Wilton. Enjoy the show.
And welcome back to the Beltway Wars Invitational Podcast with your host, solo running it today, Adam Jackson, going over the Week 2 matchups. We had a lot of close matchups over the weekend that went down to the wire. A lot of close things that you can see by the scoreboards. Some teams go to 2-0, some teams go to 0-2, and we will talk about it all this week as we go through each matchup. So without further ado, let's go over to our first matchup of the week. Okay, let's go over to our leading scorer of the Week 2, of Week 2 itself, and that would be Jake, the Carlisle Cheddar, 137.54 to Mike, 93.82. Mike now goes to 0-2, leading the Columbia Clown College. Let's start with Jake's team here. Kirk Cousins, the fill-in for Jordan Love, has a pretty good day on Monday night. 20-29, 241 yards, two touchdowns through the air. Saquon Barkley in that same game, 22 carries, 95 yards, does get involved in the passing game as well. 4 for 5, 21 yards. Alvin Kamara, my goodness, what a steal for Jake's thus far. 20 carries, 115 yards, 3 touchdowns on the ground, and 1 touchdown through the air as that Saints offense really seems to be humming early in the season. Garrett Wilson has a nice 8-point day, 4 for 6, 57 yards. Devontae Adams really roasts the Ravens there in Baltimore, 9 for 12, 110 yards, and a touchdown. Jalen Reed, who we talked about last week, doesn't really have that too much of a connection with Malik Willis. Maybe that will change going forward, but only 2 for 2, 9 yards. Kyle Pitts, also kind of disappointing. 3 for 4, 20 yards. Zach Moss, still getting a little bit of the volume. 12 carries, 34 yards against Kansas City in that loss. Looking through Jake's squad, very formidable team with the top 3 players, Kirk Cousins, Saquon Barkley, and Alvin Kamara. Kirk Cousins then filling in very nicely for Jordan Love and Devontae Adams as well at the wide receiver position. So I'm going to ask Adam a question here. Out of those 4 players, which one do you believe has been the most impressive through 2 games, and where we weren't really expecting them to be this good this early on, but has really proved the doubters wrong? I'm going to put on my hat as I answer this question. Well, Adam, out of these 4 players out of the 3 players, Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara, and Devontae Adams, I would say that the most surprising person is Alvin Kamara, especially with the draft capital that you use to get Alvin Kamara to have 43 points. I'm pretty sure he's the number 1 overall player and running back in fantasy football. Gets 15 carries in the first week, 20 carries, even with a low snap percentage, doing the most with his opportunities. He could be easily a top 5 running back the rest of the way. That Saints offense looks very good, very explosive. So I don't see this train ending anytime soon. Has some plus matchups here where the usage is going to be large. Philadelphia, Atlanta, Kansas City. His next 3 matchups. So a lot of good things for Jake. He is 2-0, really starting off to try to get back into that championship this year as he lost last year. And looking on his bench, he even has some good depth pieces here. Mike Williams, he's going to get better as the season goes on. He's going to get more snaps. Jameson Williams as well. A nice player there, has 2 consecutive weeks of double-digit points. And Tyler Algier, even 9 carries for 53 yards. He's a nice little flex piece that could be used for Jake in the coming weeks. Even with Bijan Robinson there in Atlanta, still is usable and still does great with the opportunities that are given to him. But let's go over to Mike's side of the ball. 0-2 now, 93.82. 0-2 on the season. Dak Prescott really struggles in this game, which against the Saints, which looks like a real NFL defense. 29-30 or 27-39, 293 and a touchdown, 2 picks on the day. Aaron Jones, nothing doing there against that stingy San Francisco front 7, 9 for 32. Does get involved in the passing attack, but does also lose a fumble as well. James Conner has a great day. Continues to be one of those players that I talked about in the mid rounds of the draft that's really performed well in the first 2 weeks. 21 carries, 122 yards, and a touchdown. Tyreek Hill, kind of a down day. And it's going to be interesting to see how Skylar Thompson really benefits or disappoints Tyreek Hill owners in fantasy going forward as Tua is out for the foreseeable future. Only 3 for 6, 24 yards. Marvin Harrison, my goodness, the rookie really broke out in week 2, 4 for 8, 130 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air in that blowout against the Rams. Travis Kelce, nothing really doing. Isaiah Likely, he decides to start 2 tight ends. That first week kind of looked like a kind of aberration a little bit. 2 for 3, 26 yards. So a lot of, and then let's just look at the bench here. Austin Eckler, who I'm actually kind of a fan of, and does get 10 points here, 8 for 38, and is involved in the passing attack. My big question for Mike here, Adam, is how worried are you, or can Tyreek Hill still finish as a top 10 wide receiver with Skylar Thompson throwing on the ball? They did just sign Tyler Huntley as well there in Miami, so it might not be Tyler Thompson, I think Skylar Thompson. He might be on a short leash. So how does the Tua effect of Tua not being in that game really affect Tyreek Hill's value? Well, Adam, I think that's a great question. Tyreek Hill, with his rapport with Tua, has really been a top 5 fantasy wide receiver in fantasy the last 3 years or so there in Miami. There's going to be a hit. Can he really stay top 10? I'm not sure. He did have a little bit of connection with last year when Tua was out. But, and he's a talented player, so it could be. But I have real concerns for Mike because he needs Tyreek Hill to be that top 5 wide receiver just with the problems that he has on his roster. Christian Kirk looks completely lost in that Jacksonville offense. Travis Kelce hasn't got it going yet. And not a lot of depth pieces, maybe Austin Eckler, but he needs his first-round draft pick to really produce, and right now it's not looking good for Mike going forward. Just let's look at Tyreek's next 3. He has Seattle, Tennessee, and New England. Seattle and New England, not easy defenses, I would say. So, tough going there. How does the Miami offense handle Tua being out and against these tougher defenses? It remains to be seen. But Mike is now 0-2. It might be time to start panicking a little bit. Week 1, he already had to do a shotgun, his first shotgun of the Beltway Wars Invitational. So are there more shotguns in his future? I would say maybe, with the down production that Tyreek is probably going to have in the next couple weeks. So 0-2 now for Mike. And there's still a lot of question marks here with Tyreek Hill, Christian Kirk, and Travis Kelce. So remains to be seen, but the future does not look bright for Mike right now, and I think that he's hoping for Tua to come back sooner rather than later. Our next matchup here, that would be Patrick with the Westminster Warbirds going 2-0 against Alex's Owings Mills Ogres, 133.82 to 100.20. Very impressive day for Pat, as I said, going 0-2 on the young season. Let's start with Joe Burrow, 17 points, 23 of 36, 258 yards and 2 touchdowns. Does have a fumble loss in this one against Kansas City in their loss, now starting 0-2 on the season, as Cincinnati usually does on the beginning of the season. Kyren Williams, 12 carries, 25 yards, does save the day with a touchdown, and is involved in the passing game, 4 for 5, 27 yards through the air. James Cook on Thursday night, my goodness, 11 carries, 78 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a touchdown through the air on his 1 reception on the day. 2 touchdowns equals his total number of touchdowns last year, so good on James Cook for finally getting it going and stealing some of those touchdowns away from Josh Allen. Calvin Ridley has a nice day, 4 for 6, 77 yards and a touchdown. Rashid Rice, which is probably one of the steals of the draft in terms of wide receiver, 5 for 6, 75 yards and a touchdown. Really has a good rapport with Patrick Mahomes in his second year there in Kansas City. And then he also starts Demarcus Robinson, who we're going to get into, 2 for 4, 50 yards. Not that impressive on the day, but with news of Cooper Kupp now being out for an extended period of time, it'll be interesting to see how he is used there in LA. A.J. Brown was out in this one. He's going to be out a couple of weeks, so it is good that Demarcus Robinson now has increased value for Patrick in the Beltway Wars Invitational. My question for Pat is, let's see, Demarcus Robinson, as we just mentioned, can he be an adequate, there's the word, adequate substitution for A.J. Brown? Now, we're not expecting him to be A.J. Brown, but now with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua out for extended periods of time, Demarcus Robinson looks like the number one option there in L.A. Let's put this on here. Well, I think Demarcus Robinson, talented wide receiver. He was with the Ravens for a little bit, I think 2 years ago. Matthew Stafford in that whole LA offense really likes to dial in on one wide receiver and really feed him the ball. I think, you have Tutu Atwell there. You have some younger players there as well. I think it's Tyler Johnson there as well. Demarcus Robinson probably is going to be, a top 20 wide receiver as long as those two people are out. Just with the volume and the way that Matthew Stafford really force feeds one person the ball. It was a great pickup last week by Pat to kind of foresee that with Puka Nacua going out, and now with Cooper Kupp going out, his value is just skyrocketed at this point, and can really be a nice little piece for Pat to really fill in the gaps for A.J. Brown. So good on Pat for seeing the value there, and the value has just extended further for Pat. So Pat, Westminster Warbirds, goes to 2-0 and scores 133 points. So he is in good position through 3 weeks, or 2 weeks. Let's go over to Alex's squad here. 0-2 on the day, on the season, 100.20. Looking at his squad, C.J. Stroud, 23 of 36, 260 yards and a touchdown. Only 14 points, so you need to see more with the draft capital that was spent on him. For Alex, Jamar Gibbs, 13 for 84, pretty good, and very involved in the passing attack, but does not come out with a touchdown, which he really needed in this matchup. Ezekiel Elliott, only 6 carries, very concerning for him there.
You blame me.
I hear you, sir.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
You're good.
Should I mute myself?
Yes, please.
Okay, sorry.
Amon-Ra St. Brown, 11 for 19, 119 yards, 19 targets. You love to see that out of Alex here for Amon-Ra St. Brown, first round draft pick. 19 targets. Love to see that. DJ Moore, 6 for 10, 53 yards on the day. Zay Flowers, 7 for 11, 91 yards and a touchdown. And that is about that here. Looking at his bench, though, Antonio Gibson. You know, he's looking for some running back depth. 11 carries, 96 yards. Like to see that. Maybe he gets a little bit more involved. Maybe he starts to claw away at that running back position by Ramondre Stevenson there in New England. And Darnell Mooney, 3 for 7, 88 yards and a touchdown. He seems to have a role in that offense with Drake London sort of struggling and Kyle Pitts not really being involved. So it'll be interesting to see if Alex decides to start Mooney there in the flex spot, or maybe another one of these spots here where he doesn't get in so much value. But looking at his squad, my main question for Alex would be Ezekiel Elliott. How concerned are you with him? You know, you're already very light at running back, and he only gets 16 carries. It looks like he's losing some work to Rico Dowdle there in Dallas. How concerned are you with Ezekiel Elliott there in Dallas? So put him on my hat. Well, Ezekiel Elliott, old, you know, was signed this offseason from New England. Wasn't very impressive there as well. Seems like a touchdown or bust kind of guy. And I think as the season goes on, Rico Dowdle is going to take more and more work from Ezekiel Elliott, and it's going to be harder and harder to trust going forward, which is really going to torpedo Alex's team. As you know, I was not very high on Alex's squad after the draft. And one of the main reasons why is the lack of that second running back that you can start. And Ezekiel Elliott, it seems to be that he's losing more and more work there in Dallas. Only 40% snap share. And this one, I could see that going lower and lower, maybe just getting the goal line work for Dallas. So very concerning there. But I will say that, you know, if Antonio Gibson can keep doing his thing here, maybe you have to start thinking about starting him in place of Ezekiel Elliott. Is that enough to get him 2 or 3 wins this year? I don't know. But right now, Ezekiel Elliott is trending in the wrong direction there in Dallas. And I just think that as the season continues, as he gets more wear and tear on him, I think they're going to start moving away from him and really managing his snaps just so when they get within the 20s, that's where he'll be used. So I am very concerned about Alex's team. Me and Pat had him in the D grade, and now he is 0-2, still looking for his first win. Okay, let's go over to our next matchup on the day. That would be Adam Jackson's Union Bridge Barracudas versus the Orchid Beach Ovaries. Thank you for making me say that every single.
Orchard, by the way, not
Orchid.
Orchard, like a
orchard.
Like a grape
I thought orchid. I say that wrong every week. Then
grape orchard.
Don't embarrass me.
Isn't that like
an apple orchard?
An apple orchard. Sorry.
Orchard.
I'm thinking of a vineyard.
Oh, God. All right. This is already a horrible idea. All right. So going over here.
Great idea. You know why I agreed to do that?
Yeah. I kind of figured.
Yeah.
Let's go over to the losing side here first. Let's go over to my squad. I scored 111.84. Go to 1-1 on the season. Starting with Jane Daniels, kind of a disappointing day. No touchdowns against a defense where he should have scored touchdowns on. 23 of 29, 226 yards. 10 carries for 44 yards. Only 13.44 points. Jordan Mason, 20 carries, 100 yards, touchdown. Very good fill-in for Christian McCaffrey thus far. Tony Pollard, 17 carries, 62 yards, 5 for 6, 40 yards for 12.70 points. The return of Chris Olave a little bit, 4 for 6, 81 yards, 10 points on the day. Malik Neighbors with 18 targets there against Washington, 10 for 18, 127 yards and a touchdown. Trey McBride.
But we We won. Did you see a replay? I'm sorry, just pause for a second. Did you see the end of that game? Because I didn't, because I couldn't, like, I don't even get the Commanders games where I live.
I thought you were a Ravens fan now.
I mean, I was watching the Ravens game because it was the only one I could get at the time. But it was the best. I watched a YouTube video of a Giants fan doing a play-by-play of the game and like watching all hope drain from his face was just amazing. And we won with a field goal in the last 30 seconds.
Yeah, it was a very exciting game.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome.
But just going over my squad, obviously disappointed that I lost. Had some bad days from Jalen Daniels, Mike Evans, Deontay Johnson. I guess my question for myself would be, Jaden Daniels, how concerned are you about if he... I'm asking myself this question. Jaden Daniels... Yeah. Jaden Daniels, being so up and down, being a rookie, how much can you trust him going forward to really score you the optimal 20 points per week that you really look for in a quarterback?
That's what
I'm putting on my hat. All right.
What's that hat about?
It's when I ask myself a question and I answer it. All right, so Jaden Daniels, rookie, as we know, he's going to have these up and down type of weeks, but at this...
Oh, okay.
This is what I'm going to wear at the Renaissance Festival. Each week, he's going to have up and downs, but I'm going to need to start him each and every week just because of how weak my roster really is. With Mostert being out, with Christian McCaffrey being out, I really need him. I really need the boom or bust. I need him to boom more than bust in terms of leading my team. So he's going to be in the lineup for the foreseeable future, and just hope for a better result, more than 13 points. Looking for more of those 25, 26 point days like he had in week 1. Don't laugh at my head. All right, I'm out of there.
You better it out my commentary. It's the best part.
Well, it's staying in there, so I mean, I'm recording all of this. So let's go over to Sarah's team, which is the reason why she's here. She beats me. Goes to 1-1 on the season, 122.72. Jalen Hurts on Monday night seals the deal for her. 23.82 points, 23 of 30, 183 yards, a touchdown, and runs the ball for 1385 and a touchdown. Devin Achane on Thursday against Buffalo, 22 carries, 96 yards, 7 for 7, 69 yards to the air, and a touchdown. Looks to be that number 1 running back that she drafted. David Montgomery, nice little day here, 11 carries, 35 yards and a touchdown, and is involved in the passing attack. CeeDee Lamb, 4 for 7, 90 yards and a touchdown, being that number 1 wide receiver that she drafted. Nothing else much doing. Evan McPherson, 16 points. You always like to see that out of your kickers. I will say this, anecdotal. Me and Sarah were texting, and she, at the last moment, put in Cade Otton over the out Evan Ingram, and he actually scores negative points for her this week, so it's very funny for her. But okay, Sarah, I'm going to throw it over to you. How do you feel after 2 weeks? You're 1-1. You beat me.
Well, let's explain that little thing that you were saying.
Okay.
So I realized I had to check my lineup, and it was 12:59, and my tight end was out with a hamstring injury, and I was like, shit, I gotta change it. And then Adam texted me a couple hours later, and he was like, you would have been better off just leaving.
Okay.
Because I got me negative 0.4 points, and I was like, that's just my fucking luck.
Yep. But yeah, I mean, you're looking. I mean, with your, let's see, your top running back, your top wide receiver, and the quarterback. I mean, looking good so far. Jalen Hurts is now the number 3 ranked quarterback. Devin Achane is the number 3 ranked wide receiver. And let's see if we can go 3 for 3. Nope, CeeDee Lamb's number 16, but double-digit point days in each of his first 2 weeks. So I guess what would be my question for you? let's talk about George Pickens, Steelers wide receiver. Has a nice day, week one. Doesn't get in the end zone, but kind of disappointing here. Are you going to stick with him, or do you have, you have Wicks there who caught a touchdown this week. You have Shakir as well, who was very much involved in Buffalo. Are you looking to change that number 3 wide receiver, or are you just going to let it ride with George Pickens?
I'm going to weigh options here, but, it's hard to say. Last week, Wicks wasn't, doing anything. And then Shakir, he's pretty solid. I might throw him in there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
distracted by my tight end situation that I didn't now, but it is something that I'll probably think about doing.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, with George Pickens, I think that it hurts that it's Justin Fields starting right now instead of Russell Wilson. I think that George Pickens has more value if Russell Wilson is starting. Let's see next week if he does. So maybe just hold there, but if Justin Fields does start there next week, I think that is a discussion to be had, whether you're starting George Pickens or one of those other players. So good on Sarah. She's 1-1, right in the thick of it. And we'll move over to our next matchup.
You know what I was wondering at?
Yes.
I might actually beat you in fantasy.
Yeah, well, I didn't have my first loss till like week 15 last year, so I might as well just get it out of the way now. But yeah, my team is in trouble. In trouble. Lots of issues going on right now. So hopefully,
bench. He's got like so many players out injured.
Who? Josh?
Josh.
Oh, we'll get to him. We'll get to him. Hold on. So that's it for this matchup. I don't want to talk about it anymore. Going over to our matchup here.
So we were recording already.
No, no. Sarah did not listen to the pre meeting notes here. Interjecting a little too much, but that's fine. Keep it natural. But let's go over to Josh's squad. The Pasadena Plague, 119.76 to Dustin's 108.88. Josh is now 2-0, and Dustin is now 0-2 with the Pikesville Pink Pony Club. I hate saying that every week as well. But let's go over to Josh's squad, and as we have him on the pod, Anthony Richardson, kind of in that same boat as Jalen Daniels. Kind of, he didn't really have a lot during his rookie year, have a lot of playing experience. Kind of struggles in this one, throws 3 interceptions there in Green Bay. Can make all the throws in the NFL, but can he just get more consistent for Josh to have value? Isaiah Pacheco, he has a nice day before he goes out. Now he's going to be out 6 to 8 weeks, I believe. Definitely a candidate for IR. 19 carries, 90 yards. It'll be interesting to see who Josh decides to fill the void there for Pacheco. Maybe he's on the roster, maybe he's not. I'm not going to ask him about who he might add because that'd be a little unfair, but I would suspect that he's going to try to add somebody there. Najee Harris, 17 carries, 69 yards, catches 1 ball there against Denver. Wan'Dale Robinson, 2 for 4 only, 18 yards only, but gets in the end zone. Solid 8 points there. Brandon Ayuk, kind of disappointment, 4 for 5, 43 yards, and what was a positive game script for San Francisco. Should have been throwing the ball a lot more and he should have produced a lot more than he did. Chris Godwin, kind of another sleeper pick there. Later in the draft, 7 for 8, 117 yards, and a touchdown, is now wide receiver 1. Whoa, I didn't even know that. 14 overall. So good on Josh for finding that value there in the draft. George Kittle, 7 for 8, 76 yards, and a touchdown. Good day there, from the one good day from the San Francisco player and another bad day. Devin Singletary, though, 16 carries, 95 yards, and a touchdown, and a bad Giants offense, at least that he's producing 79% snap count. So he is on the field early and often for the Giants. Going over to his bench, Trevor Lawrence, you're probably not starting him over Anthony Richardson. You got Romeo Doubs, kind of interesting, 3 for 362 yards. Taysom Hill, he decides not to start and is also questionable for Josh's squad going forward. So my question to Josh is, with the news of Deebo Samuel being out for multiple weeks, what do you think the ceiling is for Brandon Ayuk? As we saw, kind of on a snap count the first week, is at 87% this week. So it was on the field a lot this week. But what do you think the ceiling is? Is he now, with Deebo being out, a top 15 wide receiver for you?
I hope so. A lot more for where I took him in the draft. The first couple, I think he was just trying to get his groove, but now I would assume he's going to get a lot more looks with Samuel being out.
Yeah, and I think that, with Samuel being out, that's a lot of targets. Even with Christian McCaffrey being out, I think that people don't really realize how much they utilize Christian McCaffrey in that passing game. Jordan Mason's not really that much involved, so that's just another dimension that, does Brandon Ayuk now take that Deebo Samuel role? Does he line up in the backfield? Does he get some rushing attempts? He's definitely talented enough. I kind of agree that he's a top 15 wide receiver as long as Deebo Samuel's going out, and I'll do a bold prediction for Ayuk next week. Next week he plays the Rams. I believe that he will have 8+ catches and 100 yards on the day next week.
I need him to be, because Naku is now on the IR as well. I lost him, and now I'm losing Pacheco too. So hard up. They didn't have a whole lot of depth to begin with.
No, not in this league. We have a lot of spots. We start 3 wide receivers, not a lot of margin for error. But like I said, 8 plus catches, 100 yards next week. He should be over that 90% snap count next week. So I think that better days ahead for Brandon Ayuk just because of the opportunities that he's going to get. But you're now 2-0, so don't complain about that. 119 points. And sitting good, even with some of the injury concerns that you do have. But let's go to Dustin's squad. Now 0-2. Lamar Jackson didn't look like the Lamar Jackson himself. Does get 45 rushing yards. Throws a bad pick. Has 1 touchdown on the day. Ramondre Stevenson, 21 carries, 81 yards, and a touchdown. So they really seem to be pounding the rock there in New England, just keeping it on the ground and keeping those games close. So maybe there is a two-headed monster there in New England with Antonio Gibson and Ramondre Stevenson. Maybe both are usable. DeAndre Swift, 14 carries, 18 yards. That's horrible efficiency against Houston. Kind of been a disappointment thus far. Only 5 points in his first contest, 6.2 in his second. So something to be concerned about, I think, for Dustin. Justin Jefferson leaves this game early, but does have 4 for 7, 133 yards, and a touchdown. Drake London, 7 targets. You'd like to see that. 54 yards and a late touchdown there against Philadelphia. Brock Bowers, who we all watched because we all watched the Ravens games, he was open early and often, 9 for 9, a perfect day for him, 98 yards. So definitely, we talk about the tight ends and how they've been very disappointing thus far. Brock Bowers seems to be, treading upward. He's now the number 3 tight end, believe it or not, with no touchdowns on the year. So very interesting there. Looking at his bench, some of the interesting folks here, he had Kenneth Walker out. He had Keenan Allen out. But Braylon Allen, only 35% snap count, but does get in the end zone twice through the air and on the ground. Might be a usable commodity even with Breece Hall being there. So for Dustin, I think my biggest question here is Brock Bowers. I mean, great pickup. He definitely fell in our draft. Can he be, and I assume that he's going to get better week in and week out, Is he going to be that top 5 tight end that he really needs him to be? I'll pull my hat as I answer my question. All right, so get that on. Okay, so Brock Bowers, tight end for the Raiders. And I do believe that he can and will actually be a top 5 scoring fantasy tight end this year. You have Devontae Adams there, Gardner Minshew there. Brock Bowers is very talented. They're using him in very creative ways. He's getting open. It seems like they're running Devontae Adams on these, long crossing routes or on the outside, and Brock Bowers is just really devouring the middle of the field. And Minshew is finding him. He's playing very well. Brock Bowers is kind of really cutting into that Jacoby Myers role of last year where he was definitely productive. You'd like to see the touchdown start to uptick, but I believe right now, just with the talent and how he was getting open yesterday, I think that he really does have a good shot at being a top 5 tight end, which we look at rookie tight ends, and that's not really the case ever for a rookie tight end to really show this promise this early and often. So good on Dustin for seeing that, and I truly do believe that he will be a top 5 tight end at season's end. So Dustin squad, just to close it out, 0-2, really needs a win next week, and we'll look to get one, hopefully, for Ravens' sake and for Dustin's sake. Lamar Jackson plays angry against Dallas, and Dustin can finally get on the board. Let's go over to our next matchup here. That'd be Tom versus Scott, the battle of the roommates in Westminster. Tom comes out on top. Now goes to 1-1 on the season. The Finksburg Freaks, 123.44 to 74.96. The low score on the week in the Beltway Wars Invitational. That would be by Scott. Thank you for submitting your shotgun video before this podcast came out. Now goes to 0-2 on the season. Let's start with Tom's team. Patrick Mahomes, who we've talked about a little bit here. Still another disappointing day, and what should have been a higher scoring game. 18 for 25, 151, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Should have been 3 interceptions, really, but it was called back by penalty. So a little bit concerned here with Patrick Mahomes now. 14 points in his first week, 12 points in his second week. After that, not great fantasy year last year. Not getting off to the right start for Tom, even though he gets the win in this one. Breece Hall, 14 carries, 62 yards, 7 for 8, 52 yards in the air, a touchdown. Made a really nice catch in the end zone, really high-pointed the ball. I wish Nelson Aguilar would have high-pointed the ball when Lamar threw it to him in the end zone, but this is Tom's team. Not going to talk about Nelson Aguilar any further. Travis Etienne, who was very, very high on before the draft started, 13 carries, 52 yards, and a touchdown, 3 for 4 for only 6 yards, but like to see him get back on track as Tom's number 2 running back. DK Metcalf, really did well here, 10 for 14, 129 yards and a touchdown, 23.90 points, really leading his squad in terms of points. You have Brian Thomas, who he decides to start 2 for 4, only 4 targets on the day, only 2 catches, but 94 yards, really does the most with his limited usage. Xavier Worthy has a real come down from last week. Only 2 for 4 for 17 yards, does get 1 carry. Mark Andrews, I would say this is sort of a bounce back, and I think the worries about Isaiah Likely taking over his job was a little bit premature. 4 for 5, 51 yards. Out of the tight end position, 4 for 5 for 51 yards, you'll take that every single week because the tight end position has been horrendous thus far this season. Gus Edwards, 18 for 59. Like the 18 carries, not very efficient, and doesn't get in the end zone. So that's very interesting to see for Tom, whether he keeps putting Gus Edwards out there or if there are better options on the bench. There might be a couple better options. Brandon Aubrey, 18 points. Wow, really like to see that. Even in their loss against New Orleans, really very much involved. Probably the best kicker in the NFL right now. Can make them from 50, can make them from 40, can make them from 60. Very good player. Looking on his bench, Alexander Madison, I'm pretty sure Tom spent a large chunk of his fab money on Alexander Madsen. I don't say Madison, but it's Madsen. 4 carries, 1 yard, and a touchdown. Interesting stat line. I don't think I've ever seen that stat line before. Jalen Polk, 2 for 3, 12 yards, and a touchdown, so it does get in the end zone. You have Gabe Davis and, as I mentioned earlier, Tyler Johnson, who might be in store for a larger workload now that Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are out for an extended period of time. Looking at Tom's roster, I think my biggest question is with Gus Edwards. Now, he's in the flex spot, so we like to not think about our flex spot as being that important, but 18 carries, you like to see that, 59 yards. But with the amount of money you spent on Madsen, you would think you want to put him on there. And is it start to be a conversation now where Tyler Johnson or Polk or Madsen can take over that flex spot for Gus Edwards, as Gus Edwards has not been very good thus far, only 2.36 yards per carry in the first week and 3.28 yards per carry in the second week. Is that a discussion where Tom's going to have where he might start these 3 players over Gus Edwards? So I think there's a case to be made to be able to start those 3 players over Gus Edwards. I will say this for Gus Edwards. Looking at it, 18 carries, not a lot of running backs, especially number 2 running backs, get that much work. So you could, as my friend Adam says, you can only score points in fantasy if you're on the field and you get opportunities. So the opportunities are there for Gus Edwards where they might not be for these other players, Polk, Davis, or Tyler Johnson. Tyler Johnson's probably the most interesting one on this list as the number 2 wide receiver in that Rams offense. Has shown in the past to be very fantasy viable. It might be a let's see next week and see how that really pans out in terms of Demarcus Robinson, Tutu Atwell, those type of players. Seeing how that folds and seeing how much usage Tyler Johnson gets going forward. So probably next week I would start Gus Edwards still just because of the 18 carries. But he is on a very short leash for me going forward. But let's go over to Scott's team here. Very disappointing day. The low score this week in the Beltway Wars Invitational. Josh Allen has a very mediocre day. And what was a very weird game there on Thursday. 13 for 19, 139 yards and a touchdown. Doesn't really carry the ball at all. 2 carries for 2 yards. That's where a lot of his fantasy production is going to come from, is carrying the football and scoring touchdowns on the ground. So don't like to see that, but again, better days ahead for Josh Allen. I am not worried about him at all. Bijan Robinson, 14 carries, 97 yards. Great production there, 4 for 5, 25 yards. Rashad White, 10 carries, 18 yards. Nothing doing there. 1 catch on the day for 5 yards. So was bad on the ground. He usually makes up for that in the passing attack. He was not involved in the passing game at all this week, so really just a dud there for White. Michael Pittman, who we were very concerned about in the preseason, 3 for 7, 21 yards. Terry McLaurin, 6 for 8. You like the targets, but only 22 yards. Michael Pittman with a young quarterback. Terry McLaurin with a young quarterback as well. Hopefully better days ahead for Scott. Keon Coleman, a big fat 0 there on Thursday night against what should have been a plus matchup there in Miami. That Buffalo offense just could not get anything going. On Thursday, Sam Laporta, we talk about tight ends, 2 for 3, 13 yards, nothing doing there. Jared Jeudy, probably the lone bright spot, 5 for 6, 73 yards. Does seem to have a rapport with Deshaun Watson there in Cleveland, so maybe better days ahead. Maybe he can become a wide receiver 3, maybe even a low-end wide receiver 2 for Scott going forward. Houston defense scores 17 points. Looking at his bench, the one question I had when looking at Scott's team was, Kenneth Walker was out. Why didn't you start Zach Charbonnet in that flex spot and then put Jared Jeudy there where Keon Coleman was? That was kind of maybe because of how late it was. You really wanted to play Keon Coleman in that what should have been a high-scoring game. Hindsight's 2020, but I would have tried to find a way to get Zach Charbonnet into the lineup just because of Kenneth Walker being out for this week. So that'd be my question there. But now, looking at my question for Scott would be Rachaad White. 13 points in the first week, but only two yards per carry. And then in the second week, only 2.8 points, 1.8 yards per carry. How concerned are you, Scott, that he's going to lose this job now that he has an injury even to Bucky Irving, and now that he won't even be worth what you drafted him? You drafted him somewhat early in the draft, and Bucky Irving looks primed to take this job away from White. Definitely concerning, Adam. Rachaad White, as we look throughout the, fantasy football last year, wasn't very good on the ground, but always had that passing yard production. He's probably still will have that passing down production in the future, but it's going to be a lot harder to generate points when he's not in the backfield, at least attempting to run the ball. I do believe that Bucky Irving is going to take this job, so I'm very concerned for Scott about Rachaad White. Not really sure where maybe Zamir White. He does look like the lead back in that I guess I wouldn't say horrible Raiders offense because they beat us, but he does look like he does get the first crack, and he did do better than Madsen in this one against the Ravens, so you might have to start him if Rachaad White starts to lose carries and snap percentages to Bucky Irving. But overview, bad day for Scott. It's going to be better days ahead, especially with Josh Allen. This is probably going to be his worst fantasy week of the season, and it might be Scott's worst fantasy week of the season with only 74.96 points. So better days ahead for the Westminster Wonder Boys. And with our last matchup of the Beltway Wars Invitational Week 2 podcast would be Charlie's Reisterstown Rockets losing a very close one to Brian's Cockeysville's Cox, 117.00 to 121.54. Charlie now goes to 1-1 on the season, while Brian goes to 2-0 on the year. Go over to Brian's squad. Kyler Murray had a really, really nice day after kind of subpar week 1, 17 to 21, 266, 3 touchdowns. Actually sat in part of the fourth quarter, so could have even had a bigger day if he played all 4 full quarters. Josh Jacobs, 32 carries, 151 yards. Does lose a fumble, which kind of hurt his day, but love the amount that they're trusting him in that ground game. 32 carries after a week where he had 16 carries. So, 30 carries, 25 to 30 carries, I think is going to be the norm as long as Malik Willis is starting for Green Bay. Joe Mixon kind of had a come down this week. 9 carries, 25 yards. Does get injured in this one. Does not look too serious. It's not considered a long-term injury. The MRI was negative on his ankle. Jamar Chase, 4 for 5, 35 yards. Doesn't really seem to be getting off to a good start, missing all the training camp, coming in very late to start week 1. You like the snap percentages, 84 to 92, but just seems to be still getting his legs under him in terms of fantasy production. Deebo Samuel gets hurt in this one as well. 2 carries, negative 10 yards, but 8 for 10, 110 yards. Deebo Samuel is going to be out for multiple weeks, so Brian is not going to have Deebo Samuel for the foreseeable future. Amari Cooper, strangely, not doing well there in Cleveland after a good year last year, at least through 2 weeks. 3 for 8, 11 yards. Colby Parkinson, 1 for 2, 12 yards, nothing doing out of the tight end position. But does get good production out of Brian Robinson, 17 carries, 133 yards. Kyrie Fairbairn, 22 points total, and the Chargers defense, 13 points. So goes to 2-0 on the year on the backs of Brian Robinson, Deebo, and Kyler Murray in week 2. But looking at the rest of his roster, I have a candidate that he could just throw in for Deebo Samuel, and that is Rashid Shaheed. 18 points in this one, 4 for 4, 96 yards and a touchdown. He's been very, very good in that revamped Saints offense. He's the one true deep threat that they have. So I think that it is very a no-brainer decision just to slide him in where Deebo Samuel is for the foreseeable future. But my question for Brian would be, looking at his squad, Amari Cooper, getting the snap percentages, but just doesn't have that connection right now with Deshaun Watson. With Deebo Samuel going out and you putting Rashid Shaheed in there, doesn't really have many other options, Christian Watson and Curtis Samuel. How concerned are you with Amari Cooper going forward, or do you think that the track record that he will get just back on track as the season progresses? Well, Adam, what a smart question that was. Very informative. I love the podcast and everything of that nature. Thank you. Through the first 2 weeks, Amari Cooper has not been producing. He's getting the targets, but not really the efficiency itself. Only 5 receptions on the year thus far. Does have a nice schedule coming up though, and this will really prove if he's really washed or if he's going to have better days ahead. He has New York, the Raiders, and then the Commanders in Week 5. So I'm not too concerned about him yet. I think that offense is still getting used to Deshaun Watson being back after having Joe Flacco last year. I think that Amari Cooper is way too talented of a player to be this bad this fast. He is only 30 years old. So I am not concerned about Amari Cooper. I would continue to play him in my lineups week in and week out. And maybe I would readjust after Week 5 if these sorts of poor totals continue, the 2.6 point totals continue. But until Week 5, I'm just rolling him out and hoping that Deshaun Watson can actually get him the ball for my squad. So, but in this one, let's leave it on a happy note. Brian goes 2-0. After, a little bit of struggles in the league thus far since he's joined. But 2-0, you never apologize for that. And well on his way to having a great fantasy season with many talented players on his squad, even though he does have some injury concerns with Joe Mixon and Deebo Samuel. But talking about injury concerns, that would be Charlie's squad. Starts Tua here on Thursday night, gets another concussion. Obviously, our thoughts and prayers are with Tua and his recovery and whatever he decides to do with his NFL career going forward. But in this case, 17 for 25, 145 yards, a touchdown, 3 interceptions, 5.50 points. It appears that Charlie's going to be rolling out Derek Carr for the foreseeable future while Tua is on IR. So Derek Carr has been very good in 2 games. Will he continue that for the Saints and for Charlie's squad? Jonathan Taylor, 12 carries, 103 yards, 14.50 points. Derrick Henry, 18 carries, 84 yards, and a touchdown. My bold prediction from last week is that he would get over 100 yards and a touchdown. I was very close to that. He did get a touchdown, but John Harbaugh decided that he's not going to run a 250-pound running back when they had the lead in the fourth quarter for whatever reason, so he did not get the yardage itself. But I would say that's a good call by me. Nico Collins, 8 for 10, 135 yards and a touchdown. Cooper Kupp, the situation with him, very talented player, but can never stay on the field. And in this one, he has an ankle injury. He's going on injured reserve or could land. It's not official yet, but he is going to be out at least 4 weeks while he tends to ankle injury. Huge blow for Charlie, as looking at his squad, no really viable replacements. Maybe one, but losing that production from Cooper Kupp in that Rams offense is a real dagger for any fantasy squad. Devontae Smith, 7 for 10, 76 yards and a touchdown. Really feasting with A.J. Brown being out. So, Cooper Kupp being out. But now Devontae Smith, his, level is way up. His fantasy value is way up with whenever A.J. Brown is out. Dalton Kincaid, the tight end graveyard, continues very highly drafted, but only 4 for 4, 33 yards. J.K. Dobbins continues to impress. 17 carries, 131 yards, and a touchdown against Carolina. But, you know, you look at Cooper Kupp. Who was someone that Charlie could just throw in there? How about Jackson Smith and Jigba? 16 targets on the day, 12 receptions, 117 yards. It looks like and it appears that he has taken that wide receiver 2 role away from Tyler Lockett, which would be great news for Charlie, as he could just slide in him for Cooper Kupp while Cooper Kupp is out. So my question for Charlie would be, how confident are you in Derek Carr continuing this fantasy relevance? 21 points in the first week, 21 points in the second week. Has a favorable schedule. Philadelphia, Atlanta, and Kansas City. How confident are you that he continues, you know, as a top, I'm going to be generous here and say top 10 quarterback as the season progresses? And is there a decision of who to start when Tua comes back if he does continue this production? Well, Adam, I'm speaking as Charlie. I talked to you about Derek Carr a little bit this week, and I am in full confidence in Derek Carr. He's looks great in this new Clint Kubiak offense. He's throwing the ball down the field. He's hitting checkdowns. He's hitting Alvin Kamara for the underneath stuff and everything of that nature. So I'm just going to ride with them. And, you know, until he shows me any different. You know, this is one of these things where you might have to reevaluate after 3 or 4 weeks just because of how good he's done in the first 2 weeks. No one really saw this coming. Pretty sure he went undrafted. Let me take a peek at that. Did he go undrafted? Yep, he went undrafted. He was picked up a week ago by Charlie, so good on Charlie. But it's you know, you got to ride with him now. He's the only quarterback on the roster, and he has a favorable schedule, and he's looked good. So maybe a diamond in the rough, maybe a second phase resurgence of his career there in New Orleans, and he's looked good. So just going to ride with him, and hopefully he continues that 20-plus production that he has in the first 2 weeks. But to close it all out here, Charlie goes 1-1. Brian is 2-0. So 1-1, just right in the middle of the pack. But does have a lot of injury concerns with Cooper Kupp, Tua, and can the people on the bench, Jackson Smith and Jigba and Derek Carr, can they fill the void enough for Charlie to continue to compete this year? But that's all we have for today's show. I hope you liked it and appreciated it. This was a solo one, so it's very hard to do. I'm doing a lot of talking, and I'm very sick, so I don't feel great. But I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll get back to our regularly scheduled programming next week with our co-host Pat coming back and being just going over week 3. But let's go over just week 3 for a second. Just go over the matchups. The Union Bridge Barracudas, go against the 2-0 Carlisle Cheddar. Then Sarah, the Ovaries, go against it's the Hughes Bowl there. Josh and Sarah go against each other, the Plague versus the Ovaries. Then the Pink Pony Club goes against the Columbia Clown College, both looking for their first win. And also looking for their first win, the Owens Mills Ogres versus the Westminster Wonder Boys, both 0-2 as well. And then one of the undefeated teams is going to have a loss after this week. The Westminster Warbirds against the Cockeysville Cocks, both 2-0. And then the Reisterstown Rockets versus the Finksburg Freaks, both 1-1 on the season. Expecting some trash talk between Charlie and Tom, as they like to trash talk each other. So thank you all for listening for the Week 2 recap. I hope you enjoyed it. And I will see you next week with our co-host back. So goodbye, everybody.
Thank you for listening and your support. If you enjoyed the show, please make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify.